Hi, this is Colleen Williams with KTL Solutions, and we're going to be going through Microsoft Dynamics GP year-end training for closing a year in 2015. The first we're going to start with is just general information on year-end closing processes. And the first thing you need to do is close your year-end modules or each of your modules within the year-end, and you need to do them in a specific order. The module order is inventory, accounts receivable, accounts payable, fixed assets, payroll, and then your general ledger. You always close your general ledger last. You don't necessarily have to close them all on the same day. You can close a module, wait a couple days, close the next module. Um, you can take this process as long as you need to take, as long as you do backups at the end of every module. That way, if something happens and you have to restore from a backup, you're not going to lose a lot of data. When you're closing, you want to make sure that all your users are out of Great Plains. In the newer version, GP 2015 R2 and 2015, it does give you the option to take that particular database um, offline so that you can close a year in a particular database and still have users in other databases. However, if you're doing intercompany transactions or something like that, that might cause an issue. So be very careful when you're doing your year-end closing. If you're taking a database offline, that your users also know not to do any intercompany transactions or anything that would hit that particular database at the time. You always want to make backups of your database during the process, and we'll do that as we go through the steps for each module. If you need assistance during your process, you can always contact KTL at support@ktl.com, or you can give us a call at 301-360-0001. The first module we're going to go into is inventory year-end closing. Here are the steps to close your year and prepare your inventory records for your new fiscal year. You're first going to want to post all your transactions for that year. You're going to reconcile the inventory quantities through the utilities menu. You're also going to want to complete a physical inventory count and post any adjustments. You're going to print any additional reports that you might want. You can make a backup of your database at this point prior to closing the year, and then you can close the year through your utilities. After you do that, you can go into the fiscal periods calendar for your company, and you can close the inventory series. This is an optional step, and then you can make a final backup of your database after you've closed your year. The final backup will be what you take on to the next. So after going over the steps, we're now going to go into Great Plains and take a look at the inventory module. So we're going to go into the inventory homepage by clicking on the left. To check any batches that we have, we will go into transactions and series post. And our series post is what lists all the batches that we have that are available to be posted. We can mark them all if we need to mark them all, or we can individually mark the ones that we want. And up here we can select post. Once we've done that step, you can go in under utilities and run a reconcile of your items to make sure that all your items are correct. After you do your physical inventory count and post any adjustments back up here into transactions, you're ready then to do a backup and then process year-end close. Our year-end close processes are all run through the routines menu. You go to routines, year-end close. In here you can select what you want to remove, discontinued items, solid lot attributes, and solid receipts and cost changes, history to prior. You pick a year, and then you can update any standard cost items if you wish. Once you hit process, your inventory year will be closed, and you will receive a report for your year-end close. Once you've done that, it's an optional, but you can go in through fiscal periods and you can change your calendar, your fiscal calendar, and mark those periods closed for inventory. And to do that, you would go to Tools, Setup, Company, Fiscal Periods. In the year that you're closing, you can go into the series close, inventory, and mark all these with check marks. That will make it so that users cannot post any transactions into these periods. And that's your inventory module. Our next module is accounts receivable. And for our accounts receivable year-end closing, we're going to post all the sales and receivable transactions for the year. We're going to make a pre-year-end closing backup, and then we can close the year. And we can go into that fiscal period calendar and close the sales year there. And then we can close the tax year. The difference between the year and the tax year is the calendar year versus the fiscal year. And then we can make another post-year and closing backup, a final backup of our system. From here, we'll go back into our Great Plains. And we will look at the accounts receivable module in our Great Plains. To go through the steps. So in our accounts receivable, now when we go into sales, we're going to go into our sales homepage, and we're going to go to transactions, and we're going to go into series post. Here on series post, we'll see any sales transactions or cash receipt batches that need to be posted in the year. We can select them all and hit post. Once those are done posting, we can then go in and run our year-end closing process. So we'll go back under the routines menu and go to year-end close. Here we have the choice to do them both at the same time. If your fiscal and calendar year is the same periods, you can select both at the same time. If they're different periods and you're just doing a calendar year, you can close the calendar year. If it's your end of your fiscal year, you can select just the fiscal year. Once you do each of these steps at the appropriate time, it'll put the closing date underneath it. You select process, and it's going to run your year-end closing. When your year-end closing runs, you look at your customer balances. So if we go into customer summary and select just any customer that we have, when we do our calendar year-end, when we do our year-end closing for our fiscal period, it's going to take our year-to-date and it's going to move it to the prior year. On the calendar year, all that does is adjust your finance charges and your balances with your finance charges. If you don't do any finance charges, there's really no need to do a calendar year closing. You can just do a fiscal year closing. And it'll, again, just move your year-to-date balances into your last year. And it'll move your last year into your life-to-date. So it kind of shifts everything down. Once you've run your year-end closing and you've checked to make sure everything looks okay, you can then go in and again, we can close our periods. So we're going to go into Tools, Setup, Company, Fiscal Periods. And in our year that we're closing, we can go into the sales and we can check all the boxes for the periods for sales. And again, this is simply going to not allow users to post into these periods. The users will get an error message saying that that period is closed and you cannot post into a closed period. The next module we're going to go into is accounts payable. When you're looking at your accounts payable year-end closing, there's two steps for closing your year in accounts payable. You always have a calendar year, and then you have a fiscal year. When you close your calendar year for accounts payable, that is so that you can do your 1099s and your 1099 statements. And then you can do your fiscal year whenever the end of your fiscal year. The most important thing to do when you're doing your 1099s, or the most important thing to know, is in January of the new year, you cannot post any payables checks until you have printed your 1099s for the prior year. And we'll go over that in a little bit. Our first steps are to post all of our transactions for the year. Our next would be to print an age trial balance with options report. We can print a vendor period analysis report if we choose to. We want to install the payroll year-end updates. This is an optional. The reason why it's optional is because if there were any changes to the 1099 format, this is where those changes would come into your system. And when I say changes, I just mean layout changes to the actual 1099 and the alignment and how it prints. If the government makes no changes, then the payroll tax update doesn't need to be run in your system. You can make a backup of your system that's called pre-1099 edit. And then we'll go into looking at the 1099 information and edit it as needed. Once your 1099s are good, you can go ahead and print your 1099 statements. And then you can make a backup that's called pre-year end. Once you do that, you can then close your calendar year. And then you can go on and continue on until you get to your fiscal year end. And then when you do your fiscal year end, you can do all of these steps except for the 1099 step. And then you can close your fiscal year. And then once you're done with both of them, you can create a backup that is named post year end. When you do this backup, that's your final backup for your accounts payable that you're going to use when you're closing your general ledger, when you're going through the steps of your general ledger. So we're going to go into Great Plains. So now we're going to go into the purchasing homepage, and we're going to get our purchasing transactions. The first thing we're going to do, again, is make sure all of our batches are posted. So we're going to go into purchasing and transactions and do series post. And here we're going to select any batches that need to be posted for the year that we're closing. And this is for our 1099s, so it's for the tax year. So anything from December earlier, we're going to make sure all that stuff is posted and say post. Once we've done that, we can print a trial balance with options. So we'll go under Reports, Trial Balance. We can print an age trial balance with options or a historical age trial balance. You can either use one that you already have created or you can create a new one. Select your date. If this is calendar year, you can pick 12/31 or whatever date you want in detail. And you can run it to the screen if you want to just check things out. You can say print, and this is what it's going to look like to your screen. It's going to give you the vendor ID, and it's also going to give you the invoice and payment amounts that you have. Once you've done that, you can take a look at it, and now we can go in and start looking at our 1099 amounts. So if we're going to look at 1099 amounts, you have different ways to do it. You can go under Inquiry and go into Vendor 1099 Detail. This is going to be a list of just your vendors that have 1099s and the amounts that they have. If I select a vendor, I can see, and I can go in and see it by the year, and I can see how much they have. I cannot make any changes or any modifications in the screen. I can simply view, and I can only view one vendor at a time. If I want to see multiple, the easiest way to do that is to go in and create a smart list. So if I go into my dynamics and I say smart list, over here under purchasing and under vendors, there's already a canned 1099 vendor list in your system. That's what it has an asterisk for. So it gives you a list of who your 1099 vendors are and what their 1099 type is. From here, I can see if I'm missing a 1099 vendor. And if I see that, then I can go back into that vendor card and select them to be a 1099 vendor. If I have someone on here that's marked as a 1099 and shouldn't be, I can do the same. I can click on my actual vendor and go to my options and change it from tax type to not a 1099 vendor. Once I do this and hit save, I can close that, and that was inline service, right? So I'm going to then refresh, and you'll see now they're gone off of my list. From here, if I want to see how much my 1099 amounts are for the year, I can insert a column, and I can go to columns and then say add, and then say 1099 year to date. I'm going to add that column and say OK, and now here's my amount. From here, I can go and say if I need to adjust an amount, if I need to change an amount, if there's an amount is 0 and I need to go in and put the amount in there, I can do that as well. I can't do that from this screen because when I click on it, it just takes me to the vendor card. It doesn't take me to any 1099 information. But what I can do from here is if this is something that I like and I want to use it year and year, I can save it in my system so that I can come back to it every year. To do that, I can go into favorites, and here's my name. So I'm just going to make a change and call it something else. Call it whatever I want. When I make it visible to, the system means it's visible to everybody who has access to Great Plains. Company is it's visible to all users in this particular company. User class is it's visible to all users within the same class that I have set up for myself. And user ID means it's just visible to me. I'm going to make it visible to the system. I'm going to say add and add to favorites. When I do that now, I can go back to my smart list, and then I see it over here as my 1099. So I can run it every year without having to make any modifications to it. Now, if I notice in my list that I do need to make changes to the amounts for some of my vendors, I can simply go and minimize that, and under cards, I can go to 1099 details. In here, I can select a 1099 vendor. I can go in and scroll through the periods and see what period I have in there with an amount. This guy doesn't have anything, so I can go in and add a 1099 amount if I wanted to for this particular vendor. I can say save, and then when I go in and I run my smart list again, vendors, here's my amount, and I upped it by $500. So it's as simple as that. And this is my list, and it will constantly refresh. Once I know that all my 1099s are correct and I'm ready to run them, I can run a backup prior to my 1099s printing, and then I can go in under routines and say print 1099. When I go into print 1099s, I can select my year, and then I can select my tax type. I have to do one at a time. Your forms are continuous, and you want to do all your vendors at the same time. You can print a 1099 form if it's the first time running it. You can print an alignment form just to make sure it aligns in your pre-printed form. You go here. Up in the newer versions, in 2013 and 2015, you have two print options up here. One is to print the actual forms, and one is to print an edit list. When you go to this printer, which is just a printer, this is going to print you your edit list. So one last time, you can look at your edit list. You can print it to the screen and make sure that you have everything correct. And then when you're ready, you can print your forms. You print your forms, you can print them to the screen first if you want to, and then print them to a printer. And that's it. Once you've printed your 1099s and everything's okay, you don't need to make any more changes, you can then run your year-end closing process. You click on year-end closing under the routines, and again, we're just doing it for the calendar year, so we can select calendar and select print a report, and then we want to say close the year. When you run this process for just the calendar year, all it's simply going to do is zero out the 1099 amounts for your vendors. When you look at a vendor summary, your year-to-date is still going to stay the same. It's not going to zero that out until you run the fiscal year-end close. So at a later date, when you're ready, you can run your fiscal year-end close. That's aligned more with your fiscal. And when you run that, when you look at the summary, it's going to move your vendor summary amount from your current year to your prior year-to-date. If your calendar and fiscal are the same, you can run it both at the same time and say all. And that's how to do a accounts payable year-end closing. The next module we're going to go on to is fixed assets. And in our fixed assets year-end closing, we're going to first close the year for our accounts payable. And when we say close the year, it doesn't mean calendar year, it means the fiscal year. So we're going to make sure that our fiscal year-end close for accounts payable is run. We want to make sure that we enter all fixed assets transactions for the current fiscal year. We're going to depreciate all assets through the last day of the current fiscal year. This is a reminder, most calendars don't change. However, if your last fiscal period of the month is February and it is a leap year, it will change. So you need to pay attention to that and make sure that you're running it through the last day of the fiscal year. The next is to perform the GL postings. You want to post all your depreciation, and you want to run any year-end reports. You can look at the fixed assets calendar to make sure that it's built. That's optional. And then you want to verify that the quarters are set up correctly. You can create a backup prior to running, and then you can perform your fixed asset year-end closing. When you're ready for that, then we can go in and we'll go back into Great Plains, and we'll look, if we're looking on the left-hand side of our modules, fixed assets is under the financial module, and you'll see if we go into transactions and we minimize financial, you'll then see fixed assets. So if I go through in all my menus and minimize financial, you'll see that I have fixed assets underneath all of it. All right, so to do our GL posting for fixed assets, it's not under transactions, it's under routine. So we'll go into routines and GL posting. And this is where we would have our batch and make sure that everything is posted in here. And we have our posting date and say process. You can run any of the reports that you want, your depreciation reports, any inventory or transactional reports that you need. And then you're going to be okay to go ahead and close the year. Again, to close the year, we're going to go into routines and year end. We're going to select our available books, or we can select them all, and then we'll hit continue. This is going to close our year for fixed assets. Once we're done with those steps, we can then create a backup, leading us into our next module to close. And our next module to close is going to be our payroll module. The payroll year-end closing module, the first step you want to do is install the latest tax update. And then you want to complete all your pay runs for the current year. You can complete any month-end, period-end, and quarter-end procedures for your current year, and then you can make another backup. After you make that backup, you want to install any year-end updates. And when you go in and you look to run those year-end updates, you will see that there are payroll tax updates and there are year-end updates. You want to make sure in these steps that in the first step you run the payroll tax update, the second step you run a year-end update. You can create your year-end file and make a backup of your file. Once you have your backup, then you can look at your W-2s, your 1099-Rs, your W-3s, make sure all of your reports are correct, all your W-2s are correct. You can print them and then transmit them. If you want to create an electronic W-2 file, you can do that as well. This is a good time to archive any inactive employees if you choose to do so. It's not a requirement. You're going to set up your fiscal periods for your next year, and then you want to close your fiscal periods for your current year. That's an optional setting. It's not a requirement. The next step is going to be, or the last step is going to be, install any payroll tax updates for your next year. For this 2015, but it's really in 2016 is what we're going to want to do. So we're going to jump into Great Plains. And in Great Plains, we're going to go to the HR and payroll. And from here, all of our year-end closing information is done under the routine. To do your payroll tax updates, you can go into the Dynamics windows, and under Maintenance, you'll see U.S. payroll tax updates and check for updates. When you do this, it'll take you to a wizard. You can do it automatically and hit Next and go through and have them automatically installed, or you can do it manual. When you're doing it automatic, you do need to make sure that your users are out of the system because this does update tax tables and it does update your workstation. Once your tax updates are there, you can then go into the year-end wage reports and build these. You can select your year and you can select your employees and build it. And then when you're ready, you can edit your W-2s and print your W-2s, edit your W-1099-Rs and print your 1099-Rs. Once your W-2s are correct and you want to build a file for electronic filing, again, this is optional. You can click on that. When you do that, you select your reporting year. The most important part in this, when you're creating a file, is not necessarily your file name, but where you're writing your file to. So if you click on the file and you're saving it out somewhere on your desktop or on your C drive, you need to make sure that your user that you're logged into has read-write permissions over the folder that you're trying to put this file into. If it does not, you will get an error. The error will not tell you that you don't have read-write permissions, but 9 times out of 10, if you're getting an error doing this process, it's because you don't have read-write permissions to where you're trying to save your file to. You simply say create your file, and then you have a file out there for electronic filing. Your next step is you're going to want to print or to do a backup of your system prior to running your year-end closing. Once you have a backup, you can then go into payroll year-end closing and hit process. When you've done this, you can then go into your fiscal periods and close your payroll. So we'll go back to Tools, Set Up Company, Fiscal Periods, in the current year that we're at, and go into Payroll and check all the boxes so that users can't post transactions into payroll. And we've also done purchasing, so we can close those as well. Our last and final module to close in our system is our general ledger. To complete our general ledger year-end closing, we must first complete all the posting procedures and close all the other modules. If you don't have a module or you don't use the module like inventory or payroll or anything like that, obviously you can't close it, but you do need to post and close all the modules that you are currently actively using. You're going to post any final adjusting entries in your general ledger for the year you're closing. Print an account list and verify the posting types of each account. What you want to do on this one is you want to print a smart list or an account list out of your system that tells you which accounts are labeled as balance sheet accounts and which accounts are labeled as profit and loss. In doing this, when you close your year, any account labeled as a balance sheet account is going to roll a beginning balance forward. Any account labeled as a P&L account is going to zero that account and close it to retained earnings. You want to close the last period of the fiscal year, which is in that fiscal calendar. Mark it closed so that no users can go in and make any changes to it. You can perform file maintenance on the financial series group. That's optional, and by doing file maintenance, it's just kind of some cleanup. You want to verify your settings in your general ledger setup window. Make sure that your retained earnings account is correct. If you have marked to a divisional retained earnings, that your divisions are all set up, anything like that. You're going to make a backup of your database. You can print a final trial balance report and any year-end statement. Create your new fiscal year, and then you can go in and close your current fiscal year. Once you've done that, you can go in and close all the fiscal periods for all the series. Again, that's optional, but it does prevent users from posting to those periods. You can adjust the budget figures for your new year and then print a financial statement, and then you can make a final backup. So we're going to jump back into Great Plains, and we're going to go into our financial homepage. And from here, our first step obviously was to make sure we closed all the other modules, which we've done going through these steps. So now we're going to make sure that all of our batches are posted for financial. So we're going to go into financial transactions series post. And in here, any of the batches that we have out here that we need to be posted, we can mark them as post and post them. Once we do that, we want to do an account list to see and make sure that all of our accounts are coded correctly. So again, the easiest way to do that is to go into Dynamic Smart List. And when we're looking at our Smart List, we can go into Financial, and we can go into Accounts, and we can I have created one called Account List for current year. The difference for this is I have this created by date. So I can run this report just for the accounts that I've created this year. So I don't have to scroll if I have a gigantic chart of accounts. I don't have to look through all of my chart of accounts. I can just look at the ones created this year. I can sort it by posting type, and I can just kind of scroll down and make sure everything that's balance sheet should be balance sheet, everything that's P&L should be P&L. Once I've done this and I'm okay with it, I can close that. And then I want to go in and make sure that my periods are closed for the fiscal year for my financial module. So I'm going to go into Tools, Setup, Company, Fiscal Periods. My current year, I can go in and close all my fiscal periods for my financial module. And then my last step is to just take a look at my GL setups. So I'm going to go under Tools, Setup, Financial, General Ledger. And in this window, it's going to give me what my next journal entry number is going to be, my retained earnings account that I'm going to close to, that I'm maintaining history on. I want to make sure that I'm maintaining history on accounts, transactions, and budget transactions if I choose to for budget transactions. I want to allow posting to history. When this is checked, it means you can post to 1 year back in your system. So if I'm closing 2015 right now, I'll be allowed to post in 2016, I'll be allowed to post journal entries into 2015 as long as this is checked. If it's not checked, I'll get an error message that says I can't post into a historical year. If I would like to post a journal entry into it, I can come in here and I can check this. I can post my journal entry and I can uncheck it. So these are my GL setups. Once I've verified that all this is okay, then I can go ahead and run my year-end closing for my general ledger. So I'm going to go down to my routine, year-end closing. I look at my year-end closing. My retained earnings account is that. The starting journal entry number is what was on my setup. I can choose to remove unused segment numbers if I'd like. I can also choose to maintain any inactive accounts, and I can do that with budget amounts. So if I am loading my budget into Great Plains and I have accounts that I use for budgeting only, so they're marked inactive, so I can't do a financial transaction to it, but I can do a budget account to it. I want to maintain that, or else I can delete it, or I can maintain all inactive accounts if I want to keep them as well. I simply, when I'm ready, I can go down here to close year and run close year. Once I do this, that last closing date is going to be the last period of my fiscal year that's set up on my calendar. Then you'll notice something new. If you're in 2013 or 2015, you have this reverse historical year. What this button does is if you close a year and you have an issue such as an account that is classified or in the wrong type, so if you have a balance sheet account but it was classified as a P&L account and it closed wrong, the easiest way to fix that would be to go into this window and say reverse historical year. What this does is it opens up the latest historical year in your system. You can go in and make that change to your account, and then you can close your year again. So that is your closing of your general ledger. Once you're done, you can double check. You can go into setups, company, fiscal periods. You'll see in your calendar it's marked as a historical year once you've closed your year. After we close our general ledger, that's it for our system. We can make a final backup. We can delete all the other backups that we've done through this entire process. and just keep that final backup in case there are any issues that we find in the near future. Do I have to close the year before the first day of the next fiscal year? No, you do not. A year-end closing for the general ledger doesn't have to be completed before you start your next fiscal year. However, it's recommended that you close your year as soon as you can. That said, can I make an adjusting entry after I close the year? Yes, you can. You can post an entry to the most recent historical year if the posting to history button is checked in your GL setups.